Happy holidays, everybody. We've got Alec Busse here, covers the Iowa State Cyclones for Cyclone Alert and the 24/7 network. Alec, let's get into this bowl game. As we were just talking, there's so much going on right now, not just with us, but everybody dealing with holidays, which is great. But there's this bowl game coming up, and both teams, bowl situations for everybody, but especially with playoffs, it's kind of like, where is this team? Where are teams, mindset? That's always a big thing year after year. Are they essentially, do they want to be there? Is it a reward, or are they just kind of ready to move on? So let's start with that with Iowa State. 10-3 going into it. They lose the Big 12 championship game, so obviously disappointed they're not in the playoffs, but obviously a great year. So just kind of, where do you think this team is heading into the bowl game, the Pop-Tarts Bowl here?
Vocally, they're saying all the right things, Chris, which I think is obviously the first thing that you want to hear. But beyond that, like the whole saying is actions speak louder than words, right? So now you have to kind of see it translate to the practices leading up to the Pop-Tarts Bowl on the 28th, and then you want to see it translate into Saturday's game. So I think we'll kind of know early how quickly they're able to do that. I do think it's a situation where they're motivated. Traditionally, under Matt Campbell, though, they haven't played very well in bowl games. I believe they've won just two bowl games in his time at Iowa State, and this is his ninth year and I believe his seventh bowl game. So overall, they haven't played well in bowl games, but the result of bowl games, like I always kind of tell people, doesn't matter too much. It's the process of getting you there and the process of having a memorable season. And overall, the 2024 season has been as memorable, if not more memorable, than any year in Iowa State football history. They win 10 games for the first time ever. They play in their second Big 12 championship, the first time since 2020 that they did that. So overall, really memorable season for Iowa State. And then if you're able to do it with a win over a big name program on Saturday, I think you're certainly putting a bow on what has been a pretty special 2024 for Matt Campbell and the rest of his program.
And different in the sense with Miami. Obviously, they've had success year over year over their, over the history of the program, but they're also doing stuff that they haven't done in a long time.
Yeah.
This is only their second 10-win season since '03. They've only won one bowl game since '06 there in 2017. It's when they went with the 10 wins, the 16 with the bowl win. So they're trying to do stuff too. 11 wins would be the first time since that '03 season, with all those first rounders there. So we'll see. The thing what's interesting with Miami, just to kind of follow up with that, is just they've not done very many interviews at all. Cristobal hasn't talked. He did the bowl Zoom when it was announced. He was on the radio this week, and that's it. And he'll be at the press conference. So there's been no access from the players aren't talking. And the only thing I think everybody wants to know is who's playing, in these bowl games. And all Mario is really saying about that is just we think a lot of guys are playing. So, or he's saying we'll have a lot of our guys. So take that for what it's worth. But hopefully we'll find out more as the game goes on. When it's going well for Iowa State, what does it look like? What enabled them to get those 10 wins? If you could kind of just, we'll break down, offense, defense, but maybe just in general, why has this team been able to have the success that it's had? Why has it been able to get those wins when they're playing well? What does it look like?
Yeah, I think Matt Campbell, the first thing he would tell you is senior leadership. It's a senior class that's been through a lot. If you go back 5 years, some of the kids in their senior class would have been a part of that 2020 team. So they experienced, the first major high point in Iowa State football history, playing for a Big 12 title all the way back in the COVID year. But then they were also part of like really frustrating years and underachieving in 2021, missing a bowl game in 2022. But this same class has been a part of like rebuilding the program back up to the level of when Matt Campbell's name was connected to so many different jobs across the country. Going to the Liberty Bowl in 2023 with a 7-5 record, 6-3 in the Big 12, and then this year you go 10-2 overall. Both of your losses come in Big 12 play, but I think senior leadership has a lot to do with it. A cohesion, a cohesiveness throughout the team that I think is really represented well within that senior class. I think the number one spot I look at for that is a wide receiver position with Jaden Higgins and Jalen Knoll, two 1,000-yard receivers. They're the only duo on the same team in the country at the FBS level with over 1,000 yards. And it's rare that you have two receivers, right? They're that productive and as close of friends as they are. I mean, they're best friends. I think they might even be roommates. Jaden Higgins tells a story all the time about how he transferred in from Eastern Kentucky. One of the first people he met was Jalen Knoll, and how Jalen Knoll really helped kind of recruit him to Iowa State. So it's cool how they have such a good relationship. And then Rocco Becht, statistically didn't take a major step forward in his second season starting for Iowa State, but what he did do was distribute the ball really well to his two star playmakers on the outside. Defensively, they've been ravaged by injuries on that side of the ball for most of the year, but their secondary has been really impressive. I believe they're top five in the country in defensive pass efficiency. They've got two pretty impactful corner slash nickel with Darian Porter on the outside, Malik Verdon at the nickel position, and then at the safety spot, Boo Frailer, really respected leader, someone who Matt Campbell has called an anchor, a warrior, all the great adjectives that coaches use to describe respected players. That fits Bo Frailer a lot at the middle safety, strong safety type position in their 3-3-5 defense. And then Jeremiah Cooper is kind of like that free safety over the top who keeps everything from getting over the top for explosive plays. So I think they are successful this year, and they went 10-2 this year because of how successful they were in the pass game, and how good they were at the same time of preventing opponents from having explosive pass plays. But they have not played an offense nearly as potent as the U's.
Yeah, let's go back to that wide receiver thing. There's a lot of stuff you were touching on there that I definitely want to get to. Let's go back to the wide receivers. You touched on the 1,000 yards. Miami fans, anybody that's watched Miami has known that that has been a struggle at times this year. You know, the secondary play in general. Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel, talk about their differences. Higgins, obviously the big guy is 6'4", and with Noel, you know, just listed at 5'11". But maybe kind of how they're used and their strengths, weaknesses. Again, both guys, you know, it's not just the yards. I mean, racking up catches,
Yeah.
touchdowns. You always like that from receivers as well.
Yeah, so obviously, I would describe Higgins as Beck's number one target, but you're really splitting hairs between the two. Higgins is more of your outside target. They really like to go to him in the red zone. Like you said, 6'3", 6'4". Isn't necessarily like the biggest bodied 6'3" or 6'4", but he has good size, good frame to him, respectable length that I think helps him on contested catches. But he's also someone who can be a really good big play threat, averaging over 13.5 yards a reception on the season. He had more explosive plays last year, his first season with Iowa State, than he did this season. But yeah, he's someone who Beck really likes to target in the red zone. And then Noel, they get a little bit more creative with him. He's a reliable route runner, seems to get open over the middle of the field much more than Higgins does, probably because Noel is mostly in the slot on most situations. But he's someone who also they like to target in the red zone as well. Maybe not as much as Higgins, but someone who had 7 receptions, Noel did this season for ISU. So they're used in different ways and they complement each other really well. It's not like you have two really great outside receivers. You have one on the outside and then you have one on the inside, and they complement each other really well. And if they're both off the field, it becomes pretty obvious that they're going to try and run the ball.
With Rocco, you know, you touched on his numbers, and look, you know, over 3,000 yards this year, 22 touchdown passes, the 9 picks, also ran for 7 rushing touchdowns, and leading the team to the Big 12 championship and racking up wins. When Rocco's doing well, you touched on his distribution. What does he kind of bring to the team? Because obviously it's going to start with him with this offense, and if they're going to pull off the win, you know, he's going to have to play well. And just your thoughts on Rocco and kind of what he brings, and maybe his you know his strengths, but also the threat that he is when he's playing well.
Yeah, I think the best way to describe him is a quick decision maker. His completion percentage this season sunk under 60%. I believe it was closer to 63% last year, his first season starting for Iowa State. I would still describe him as a fairly accurate passer for the Cyclones. I do think that at times this year he's become too reliant on Higgins and Noel, and this has become a pretty large storyline. It's like, hey, Iowa State doesn't have like a third receiver or even a third reliable pass catcher, but how much do you need one when you have the two best receivers in the Big 12, arguably, or two of the best receiving duos in the Big 12? So I think that he's a quick decision maker, generally pretty accurate with the football. He will not make very many negative plays, especially sacks. He doesn't take those. Only took 14, I think, on the season for Iowa State. So I think that that's a really good summary of him. He's not someone who is like Cam Ward creative in a broken play situation, but who is in college football anymore. But at the same time, he's someone who can run a little bit. He's not, you know, the most gifted runner. He's not super fast. He's not going to be juking linebackers out of their shoes, but he's someone who he understands where the chains are and how to get there, is how I would describe it, or at least give his team a chance to get there. I think that's how I would best describe Rocco Becht, as someone who understands how to make his team successful.
Alec, we touched on a lot of the strengths when I asked you about that. You touched obviously we're talking about the quarterback, the passing, and you touched on the defense. When it hasn't gone well, and look, just looking at their losses, those first two there in early November, back to back losses, kind of similar to Miami in the regular season. Kind
Hmm.
of grind out game in the 20s, and then lose a shootout there as they lost to Texas Tech and KU there, and then the Big 12 championship game. A lot of people probably that might have been their first experience watching Iowa State, and that obviously got away from them there. Those three losses, or maybe some of the ones that were a little bit closer, but when they're not able to get to what they want to do, what kind of leads to the losses? What's kind of been either a theme, even though the scores have varied, but essentially, what's their weaknesses? What are they most concerned about?
Yeah, and lost to Texas Tech. Beck essentially threw two pick sixes. His second interception in that game was the weird instance, right, where like the corner's running it back, and as he's celebrating, he drops it at the 1 yard line. On the next play, Texas Tech punched it in, so it's essentially two pick sixes. Those are big reasons why they lost to Texas Tech. But in the losses to Texas Tech, KU, and Arizona State, the defense just got gashed. And it's a defense that traditionally in the Big 12 over the last 3 or 4 seasons has been one of the best in the conference, and it was again this season. The loss to KU, they were down several starters at key positions, including defensive tackle. They were down to, I think they're fifth, sixth, seventh linebackers in that game. They were without one or two key safeties in that game. So that really puts into perspective what happened against KU. And then in the Arizona State game, excuse me, that game, I just think Arizona State was a better team, right? Like Cam Scadaboo, really great contact balance, phenomenal at breaking tackles, a special kind of back that just missed on going to the Heisman ceremony. And then Sam Levitt, I think I was surprised that he was second team All Big 12 quarterback, just because no one talked about him throughout the year until like the last 3 or 4 weeks of the season, and then everyone was like, wow, Arizona State's got a chance here to make a run. And I think Levitt is the one who kind of got overlooked within all of that for ASU. And he had a really good game against them as well. And Kenny Dillingham schemed them up really well, especially downfield, vertical passes, just creativity. So I think when they struggle defensively, it's allowing explosive plays because it's hard to sustain drives against them. They've had questionable tackling at times, but it's allowing explosive plays because they're not built offensively to score 35, 40, 45 points a game. They would like to be closer to the 25 to 35 range, I think, offensively, and hold teams to 20 to 30 points defensively, and win games in that kind of mold.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I'm fascinated to see what Miami's game plan is going to be with this because, as you mentioned, with Arizona State, with how that got away from what they're giving up the running yards, they're on the ground, and Miami wants to run the ball, but they've got Cam Ward. But will they look at that and say, okay, we're going to look at that, and we feel like we can expose Iowa State in that manner, and they'd have running backs. But it'll be interesting. I've always kind of worried about Miami's game plan because I think they should definitely pass the ball game in and game out because it's such a strength. Even
Yeah.
though I know they want to run, and I know you got to have some sort of balance, but I think Miami can. I think they just got to make sure that they're sticking with their passing game and really going to Cam, even if Iowa State has shown some vulnerabilities in stopping the run. I'll leave you with this, Alec. Your time is valuable. We touched on at the beginning how much going on right now. Players to watch that maybe some names that we don't know. Maybe even Iowa State fans are tuning into the bowl game. Maybe some guys that could really use a game like this to maybe vault forward, whether it's their pro careers or even into 2025. But maybe some X factors or players like that in that vein.
Yeah, the name I would go to offensively would be tight end Gabe Burkle. He wasn't their starting tight end at the beginning of the season. That would actually be Ben Bramer, who has a knee injury. He was injured against UCF all the way back in October, and I don't expect Bramer to play on Saturday. But Burkle has kind of grown into a larger role for Iowa State as a redshirt sophomore, has about 20 to 25 catches on the year, close to 250 yards. Doesn't have a touchdown reception, but he has turned into someone that Beck is more comfortable throwing to. Defensively, where I would go, starting nose tackle Dominique Orange, and I go here because I haven't said his name, a potential NFL draft prospect, someone who I could see declaring early after a true junior season here this year. I think he could have an impact on Saturday's game. You mentioned, Miami trying to get creative and run the ball more effectively after what Cam Scadaboo did. I know Damian Martinez was a big transfer addition for the Canes, but Don Moranch has been really good for Iowa State. They call him Big Citrus. It's a good nickname. Someone who I could see making an impact on Saturday. Played really well over the last 3, 4 games of the regular season after missing the KU game. So I'm interested to see how he plays. And then at linebacker, I think Iowa State will be a little bit more healthy than maybe they have been. Will McLaughlin, someone who made his season debut, what would have been the first week of November after a back injury. I think he's continuing to trend positively from a health perspective. I think Kilbrazina, a freshman linebacker from the Chicagoland area, could make his return after missing the last 3 or 4 games of the season. But then you're going to have to replace Malik Verdon in the rotation because I don't expect him to play. And I think that is the type of position where you'll see a potential freshman, redshirt freshman, or sophomore kind of step in. Look for Tashawn James to be the one who steps in for Malik Verdon. And James had a lot of struggles and lost to KU. Played a little bit better, I would say, though, against Arizona State in the loss to the Sun Devils in the Big 12 title game.
Great stuff, Alec. This was great. Enjoy your week. Happy
Thank
holidays.
you.
Safe travels to Orlando. We will see you there. But yeah, definitely appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. And looking forward to the sunny weather that you guys get to experience quite a bit.